So welcome then, guys, to Bahrain International Airport. We're here in the Saudi cargo A300F, and this video is just going to talk through some of the things we've already touched on. Mainly I want to concentrate on the landing configuration and actually how you get the A300 configured for landing, because this is something I struggle with a little bit, that I didn't quite know when to extend the flaps and put the aeroplane into the right landing config. So this is just something we're going to touch on in this little exercise. So the plan is we're going to launch off here out of Bahrain. We're just going to make a right turn, just come back round in a big square, and then we'll line ourselves up with the runway, and we'll have a look at how we get the aircraft configured. And then what we'll do is we'll do a go around, and then we'll come back and we'll do another full approach and land. And that's pretty much the plan. Just if you're interested in the scenery and the background and stuff, this is the Just Asia Bahrain scenery, and it's not bad actually. It actually covers the whole island of Bahrain, and you get some fairly nice kind of Far Eastern. We're not in the Far East, we're in the Middle East. I should know that because I'm going to be living here in probably a few months' time. But yeah, some quite nice kind of themed kind of Middle Eastern auto-gen, which actually looks quite good. You can just see the air conditioners there on the side of the buildings. I've also got a bit of a blend, actually. I've got the Just Asia scenery for Bahrain, so it's got the whole thing, and it has some custom auto-gen as well. You can see some of the skyscrapers there. That's I think the financial center, or the World Trade Center or something in Bahrain. I should probably know that before I go and live there. But yeah, it's not bad actually. It's not bad. The airport itself is okay. It has some custom models. The very distinctive kind of control tower. The only thing that is a bit poor, and I'm just going to throw this right out here, is if you just look here down by the gate area, just has this really ugly bit of kind of very low res ground scenery poking through. So when you're parked up at the gate, that's kind of all you can see really. It's just that really ugly kind of browny ground scenery poking through. So if anyone from Just Asia is watching, you did a nice job on the airport, but just fix this horrible bit, you know, just put some concrete textures in here and some bit of ground equipment or something. That bit's really ugly, and of course you see it up close. That is a little bugbear of mine with scenery developers, where they develop a whole scenery, and then the bit you actually sit and look at when you're parked at the gate is often the bit that gets the least attention. So if they could fix that, I'd be very grateful. Right, so back in the aeroplane then. Here we are, we're lined up, everything's set. So what we've got, 5,000 feet set. We have the runway heading, which is, we're not quite lined up actually. If you look outside, we're a bit wonky, but that will sort itself out when we take off. I've got 240 knots preset. Remember, we talked about the preset thing on the ground in Manchester, so hopefully you understand what we did there. The idea of the preset, by the way, is just that if we lose the profile climb, because remember, of course, we're going to use the profile mode to climb here. If we had an engine failure or something like that, and we need to dump out of profile, because normally if you have an engine failure, what happens is that you take off, and then at a fairly low altitude, around maybe 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet, you stop the climb. So you hit altitude hold, the aeroplane levels off, and then the speed builds up, and it will dump out of profile mode. And obviously, if all we have is V2 set, then the aeroplane may well start to decelerate back to that speed at precisely the moment we don't want it to do that. So that's why the preset thing exists. It actually gives us a higher speed, so the engines are not going to throttle back at precisely the moment we want them to keep giving us acceleration. So in a highly simplistic way, that's kind of what preset does. But if you don't really quite understand it or why it's there, don't worry about it. Just make sure that you do it. The preset speed, by the way, quick reminder, is the green dot plus 20. So in this situation, it's going to be 240 knots. Also, what I've done is I've just put the departure in. All we're going to do is just a quick circuit back round onto this runway. I've put a couple of place bearing distance waypoints in, and what that will give us, if I just zoom out now of the nav display, you can't quite see very far behind us, but what that's done is it's given us a waypoint in front of us and a waypoint behind, and that will just give us a little bit of awareness of where the runway centerline is. So effectively, I've just drawn a little fake extended center line in front and behind us. And I've done that based on a place bearing distance waypoint. So let me just show you how I did that. So it's based on the Bahrain VOR. The Bahrain VOR is right in the middle of the airfield, so we can use that as a reference. So it's BHR, and then the runway outbound heading, which in this case is 300, and then a distance. I had 25 miles in there. I'll extend it further if you want. Let's extend it to 100 miles. Why not? And just type that in there, and then I'm going to clear the previous one. Okay, and then I'm going to clear the discontinuity so that it all joins up, and there we go. So you can see that now that line should extend for, there you go, it should extend for 100 miles, and the range is at 120, so 20 miles. It's got a little gap there because it stopped. So really nice little way. Remember, in this FMS, we can't draw radials or range rings, which is something that we can do in the A320. In the A320, you can draw those little rings that help with your situational awareness. You can't do that in this airplane. So one way you can give yourself a bit more situational awareness is actually just to put a little fake waypoint in. So I'm just using a little fake waypoint, which is the Bahrain VOR. Again, you don't have to do this, and if you don't quite understand why I did that, don't sweat it. Don't worry about it too much. I just did it because I wanted to draw a line ahead and a line behind, and the easiest way to do that was just draw something off that VOR. So if you imagine the VOR's in the airport, and I've just drawn a little line going from it and away from it, so that as we go around this little circuit, as we fly around, we can see exactly where we are in relation to the runway. Right, that, I think, my friends, is pretty much it. I haven't done much else. I've set the trim, the flaps. I need to set the flaps because I think we're going off with, yeah, we're going off with 1515 here. So that was a good little last-minute check. I'm not really going to do all the checklist and all the rest of it. I just want to make sure we're not going to kill ourselves. So we've set the trim. The auto brake needs to be armed. We've set the flaps. Everything else is good. We've got the auto brake on max. We've got the flex temperature set, which is 42. 5,000 in, runway heading. All the lights are on. That, I think, is sufficient for me. That flight director needs to be switched on. One thing you'll notice, by the way, I've just used the ready for takeoff config. There are still some things to do. You may well still find a few little things on the overhead that are not switched on. Just make sure that you go through the overhead and make sure that all the lights are out and everything is set. Right, let's go. Now, what I'm going to do is let the brake off and a little bit of forward stick. Again, let me just bring back the yoke so you see what I'm doing. Just a little bit of forward pressure, and then the auto thrust, or the go lever, as they call it, which is in real life down here on the thrust levers. That has a little hidden click spot there, remember, just to the left of the auto thrust button. All right, there we go. Engines are spooling up. So we can see 103.1, 103.2. They're coming up slowly, slowly, slowly. There's 120 knots. V1, rotate. Okay, up we come. Let me just get it on the flight director there. There we are. Positive climb, gear up. Okay, let me get the autopilot in. There we are. Right, there's the thrust reduction altitude coming in. I guess we had it set for, yep, around 1,000 feet. So that's what we would expect to see. We're now back in the climb detent and the aeroplane speeding up. We're through the F speed. So that speed, by the way, is the speed at which we can retract the flaps. So we had flap 15 set. I'm going to move forward just so that you can see everything that's going on here with the FMAs and the flaps. And the S speed is as slow as we can fly without the slats. So we can now put those to 0, and you can see the slats start to move. And if we look over the wings, you can see them just start to retract. This, by the way, is a Chinese warehouse, and it is there on Google. I wonder what that red thing was. It's actually the roof of a kind of a Chinese, like a Chinese market, where they sell lots of imported Chinese stuff, and it has this distinctive red roof, and you can see it on the approach into Bahrain, in case you're wondering what that is. We're going to speed up now to 250 knots. We're going to go up to 5,000 feet, and we've got the heading there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn us right. Now, when I move the heading bug around to the right here, it will disappear off the display. If you look here on the VOR display, and again, let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. There is a little red heading bug on here. So I want to turn kind of 90 degrees right. That's going to be around 030. It's disappeared off the main screen, but look, we have this little heading bug here, which is going to help us turn. So 030, and I'll press heading select, and now the aircraft is going to make that right turn. All right, beautiful. Let me put the terrain on. Not that there's much to bump into here. I mean, it's all pretty much sea level. The nearest mountain is a long way away. I think Bahrain's highest hill is about, I don't know, 20 meters or something. So not much to bang into here. But I guess it's probably good practice just to have it switched on. Again, I'll just dim down the blue. You can use the brightness display. There's two. Remember, that's the main display, the big rotary switch, and then the small one actually dims the terrain. Somebody said, is the terrain writing really in this comic? Isn't this called comic, this font? And yes, it absolutely is. This is just what it looks like in a real airplane. It does, in fact, use the comic font. So somebody in France with a little sense of humor there, I think. I'll pull up the map display so you can see where we are. There is Bahrain, and we're just going to come back on ourselves, make another turn to the right. We'll then track downwind, and then we'll turn right again, and then we'll line ourselves up with the ILS. Now, at this point, it's probably a good opportunity to actually sit and talk about what we're going to do. So, the FCOM says that 3 miles before we intercept the ILS, we want to be back at the S speed, and we want to have the first stage of flaps. Now, in this aeroplane, if you remember, we already discussed this, that there are 4 stages of flaps. And rather than describe them by the numbers and say, well, it's slap 15 and flaps 0 and slap 15 and flap 15 and slaps 15 and flaps 20, it's all a bit confusing. So all we're going to talk about is first stage, second stage, third stage, and full. All right? So first stage, second stage, third stage, and full. And the FCOM says that 3 miles before we intercept the ILS, we need to be at the first stage of flaps with the speed to match. Now, at this rate, I would imagine by the time we extend the flaps and get the first stage of slats out, which is that first config, I would imagine that we're going to be back under 200 knots. I guess around 190 knots, something like that. Maybe a little bit less, actually, at this weight. And that's where we want to be. All right, so 3 miles before we come down on the ILS, we want to be in the first stage of flap with the speed to match. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. The next thing that's going to happen is that we then need to think about how we extend the rest of the flaps and get the gear down. And actually how it works from that point is quite straightforward. Now, for some reason that I don't quite understand, I've lost my little waypoint to line us up with the runway. Let me put that in there. Where did that go? Okay, I think I deleted the one that was facing the other way. So let me show you how I did this. BHR, all right, and then what we want is the outbound course. So we want the course that way, which is 120, and then let's have a distance. Let's put 100 miles in, and then let's throw that in there. There we go. There's our line, and now you can see that we've got that little line. So what we did was we used BHR. That's the Bahrain VOR. The outbound course, which is 120, so that's if you were landing on the other runway, and then a distance of 100 miles. Now we're not going to use this to navigate the aircraft, we're not going to use the nav mode, but all this is doing is it's just giving us a little bit of situational awareness. We can see where the runway extended center line is. That's why we put it in there, no other reason than that. It's just a bit of awareness for what we're doing today. And our V app, remember that 144, that's also an interesting and very pertinent number to remember doing what we're going to do today. So we've got the ILS tuned 110.3 and 300. Just want to make sure that we've got the ILS. There we are. You can see where we are now, and we're going to make this right turn and we're going to come back down. That's the plan. First of all, I need to get it out of profile mode, because what I want to do is I want to control the speed myself. Now, there's no way to control the speed in this when it's in profile, so I'm going to hit altitude hold. It opens up the speed window. I'm going to wind the speed back to about 230 knots. Speed comes back quickly. Let me sync up the heading bug with where we're going. 122, that works, that's all good. And I'm going to descend us down now to the point where we're going to intercept the ILS, which is 2,000 feet. So what I can do is I can either dial in the vertical speed, and you notice it's not descending, right? It's not doing anything until I pull the knob by clicking on it, and now it goes into vertical speed. So how they do it in the real airplane, I'm not entirely sure. Whether they select the vertical speed first and then pull, or they pull it and then do the vertical speed, I'm not entirely sure, but it doesn't matter. As long as you get it into the mode, then the airplane will start descending down. So, quick sit rep then. We want to slow down to 230 knots, which is obviously not happening at the moment because our rate of descent is a bit too high. So let me just back that off a little bit, and now you should start to see the speed coming back. Remember, the blue, and again I'll open it up so you can see it, the blue selector is the speed that we have commanded, and the yellow selector that you can see here that's just rolling towards 240, that's our actual speed. Don't get these mixed up. Sometimes you might think that the yellow one is actually our commanded speed and the blue one isn't. The blue one is what we've asked it to do. That's 230 knots. Right, we're getting quite a long way from the airport now, and in a minute I imagine we're going to be in somebody else's airspace. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn us right again 90 degrees, just using this little standby bug over here, because obviously the main one's going to disappear off the screen. So let's go to 210. We're descending down. The speed's coming down quite nicely, so I can increase that rate of descent a little bit, about 900 feet a minute. That's all going to look quite good. So here's the plan. We're going to intercept the glide slope at 2,000 feet. So this changes things a little bit from that earlier chart, because that was based on us intercepting the glide slope at 1,500 feet, and obviously we're now going to intercept it a little bit earlier than that. So if you imagine the glide slope kind of pops up from the ground, whoops, there we are, a bit of a wonky glide slope, but you get the idea. And then we're going to be flying in here not at 1,500 feet, but a bit higher than that. So we're obviously going to intercept it earlier. It normally works out at about 300 feet per mile. So you imagine in this situation, and we come tootling along here at 2,000 feet, glide slope pops up into the sky, we're probably going to intercept it, I guess, around here, somewhere like that. That's probably going to be around the 7 mile point, something like that. That's where we're going to have to be. So rather than intercepting here at 4.5 and 1,500 feet, we're actually going to intercept it probably around 7 miles. This is going to be around 2,000 feet. Now, let's think about what's going to happen next. Let me back off that vertical speed a little bit, because otherwise we'll end up actually quite low for this approach. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn us right and put us on an intercept course for the runway. So we're not quite going to come round in a perfect 90-degree turn. We're actually going to cut it short a little bit of a shortcut, about a 45-degree angle to intercept the localizer. See, the airplane's got itself a little bit slow now. I asked for 230 knots, and it's given us about 223, and it's now putting on a load of power. Now, the A300 actually will do this in real life, and what they do in the real aeroplane is apparently they just give the thrust levers a bit of a nudge just to kind of get it back where you want it to be. One thing I think you probably could do in this aeroplane is actually, rather than select, for example, in this situation, the minimum clean speed, which is green dot, I would just let it roll back to a few knots above it. Again, that might just be a bit of a thing you've got to do in the sim that you wouldn't necessarily have to do in the real aeroplane. But maybe just whatever speed you want it to be at, just let it roll back to a few knots above so it doesn't get itself bent out of shape. Because it can get a little bit slow, and then add thrust to get back to the target speed. And the real A300 does that. Alright, so we're just coming up on the localizer now. So you can see the localizer shoots out here. We're at 13 miles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the land button, and you will see any second now the localizer will start to move. It will ping itself across as we fly through the extended center line of the runway. So we're level at 2,000 feet. Again, this is not quite how you would fly it in real life, because of course we would have been on a star and we would have been descended down. But essentially this is where we would end up. We would end up lined up with the runway, at this kind of speed, this kind of altitude, and that's pretty much where we would be. So the aeroplane's going to make that right turn now, and hopefully it might fly through the localizer a little bit because we're still doing 220 knots. We're still quite fast, really, but we're about 11 miles out. So what it's going to do is it will turn itself right and it will fix itself onto the localizer. We're coming up now on about 11 miles, and if you remember, we said that from where we intercept the glide slope, we want to be 3 miles beyond that point. We want to be back at the S speed with the first stage of flaps. So let's do that now. First stage of flaps coming in. The levers move down to the first position. You see the slats change, and we're going to roll the speed back to our S speed there. So again, I'll just zoom in so you can see what's going on. And now the aeroplane is just doing a series of little S turns. You see the runway down there, and the aircraft's just doing a series of little S turns just to get itself back where it wants to be. Okay, so we're looking good. We're at 9 miles. Speed's coming back to the S speed, and we've got the first stage of flap. We have 3 more stages of flap to go, and of course we've got to get the gear. What we need to do now, have a look down to our V app, which is 143, and I didn't follow my own advice in giving the aeroplane just a few knots above the S speed. So as you can see, it's got itself a little bit slow, and now it's pouring on a little bit of power. Again, if you can just keep it a few knots above where you want it to be, then all's good. Right, here's the glide slope starting to move. When it gets to the first dot there, which is called half a dot, what we'll do is we're going to take the second stage of flap, and we're going to take the gear. All right, so there's the gear coming down, and now we select V app, which, if you remember, was 143. All right, so there's V app. So we've got the gear down, we've got the second stage of flapping. We're at about 5 miles, and we've got 5 miles to get ourselves back into the landing gate. So what we need to do now is go to the third stage of flap, and the speed for that, by the way, the maximum speed is 205 knots. And then as quickly as we can, the fourth and final stage of flap, and the limiting speed for that is 175 knots. This is the one that can get you in trouble, because around this point, you see we're around 180 knots, so we're a little bit fast. We just got to be patient for a few more seconds as the speed begins to wash off. And now, there you go. We just squeaked under it. We can set the go-around altitude, which is 2,500 feet. We can get our heading lined up with where we are. And you can see now we've got to be stable by 500 feet. So we want to be in the landing config, at the landing speed, on the path by 500 feet. And there you go. We've just about managed it. Let me set the auto brake to low. Let me make sure that that's armed. All the lights are on. We're cleared to land. And everything is good. You see the airplane again just got itself a little bit slow there. Right, I'm going to engage the other autopilot. So that gives us Cat 3. That gives us both the autopilots for the landing. Don't have to have both. But that's something that I'm pretty sure I read in the SOP. So we're all good. So there we are. We're at 300 feet. And we're coming down. We're in the landing config. And all is well. I'm going to let it come down to about 100 feet, and then we'll do a go around and I'll show you what happens there. So the airplane now starts to transition into the flare. Go around. Go around's really simple. You bring the gear up and one stage of flap. All right, so we've gone from flap full to flap 3 and the gear's up. And now we're climbing away really steeply. We're coming up at what, 3,000, nearly 4,000 feet a minute. And one thing you can do if you want to stop frightening everyone is just press climb. And the aeroplane will come out of the toga gate and it will now go into the climb gate. It's already actually captured. Look, it's already gone into alt star. So just by taking it out of the toga gate and putting it in the climb gate actually just cuts some of that engine power and stops you climbing up at 4,000 feet a minute and bashing into the level off, which is quite low here. It's only 2,500 feet. All right, so bit of a sit rep then. What have we got? We've still got 3 stages of flap out. The gear is up, so we can turn that off. And the airplane's about to level out now at our go-around altitude. of 2,500 feet. And the next thing that's going to happen is obviously, at the moment, you see we've got in the speed window 157, which the airplane has given itself. So what we're going to do now is just speed the airplane up so that we can get the flaps in. So what I'm going to do is go up to that green dot speed, and you can see that there. Go up to that green dot speed, around 225 knots. We're above the first flap speed, so we can go config 2. We're above the second flap speed, so we can go to config 1. So now all we have is just the slats out, and as we go through the slat speed, that's S, then we can go clean. And then what we'd want to do is just the quick after takeoff checklist. So are the flaps up? Is the gear up and off? Is there anything else that we need to do? Obviously the auto brake has disarmed itself. We need to make sure we arm that again by the time we do another approach. And that, my friends, is pretty much it. So you've seen an approach and a go around. And what we'll do is we'll just do that one more time. I'll take us back round in a really tight circuit at this 2,500 feet. In fact, let's just make it a little bit more realistic. And ATC have asked us to climb maybe to 3,500 feet. And we'll do that in vertical speed. All right, so we don't kind of scare the horses and we're screaming up. So 3,500 feet, and just make that right turn, and we'll come back round and we'll just do that again. So that's pretty much it, guys, really. The landing pattern, if you like, in this aeroplane is actually relatively straightforward, and it's pretty much just all about speed control. And as you saw there, it all happened really quite late, probably enough to make me a little bit nervous. In that, you know, we were still reducing to the landing speed. We were still running the flaps with, you know, maybe just over 1,000 feet to go. But that's okay. In these kind of clear VMC conditions, you can see that it's fine. We've got to be stable by 500 feet. If, by the way, the weather was bad and we weren't going to be visual with the airport and all that, all these limits are lifted. You would have to make sure that all this is done by 1,000 feet. So you would have to make sure that you've done all this stuff maybe just a little bit earlier. So in that situation, I would probably want to take the gear as the glide slope starts to move, and then take the gear, take the second bit of flaps. Remember, as soon as those flaps are out, you can go to the next selection and the next selection. The big gotcha, the only thing you've got to think about are the flap extension speeds, all right? And they are here in between the flap selectors, all right? So it's really just these two last ones, because remember, once you've taken the gear and the first two stage of flaps, then we're pretty much just sitting waiting for the aeroplane to slow down enough to get flap 3 and flap 4 out. So you've got to be under 205 knots for that third selection and 175 knots for that fourth selection. And it's easy when, you know, you're only maybe at this point, what, like 2 or 3 miles from touchdown, less than 1,000 feet or so, and it all seems to be really rushing at you, and you're panicking to get the flaps out, and it's really easy to kind of panic and get them out too soon. So remember, under 205 knots for that third selection and under 175 knots for the final selection. That's what you've got to do. Right, where are we then? We're at 6.1 miles. Once we get past about 10 miles, I'll turn us right. I'll descend us down to 2,000 feet again, and then we'll make another approach. And this one we shall land. I'm using ortho scenery here, by the way, so I'm using the Just Asia Bahrain, which covers the whole of Bahrain with auto gen and photo scenery, and I'm also using ortho XP, which fills in some of the gaps. And you can see, sadly, one of the restrictions of using ortho XP is that the colors often don't match up, which is a bit of a shame. Because I kind of like flying around the Gulf, I have a bit of an affinity, having spent quite a bit of my life here. I do have ortho scenery for Bahrain and Qatar, which you can probably see over in the distance somewhere. There it is. That's Qatar, and then Saudi Arabia is behind us over there. All right, so back into the flight deck, and let's make this right turn. Let me wind the speed back. Remember, we want to be back at green dot, okay? So when we come onto the extended center line of the runway, we want to be back at green dot. There's a little bit of ship traffic there. I'm using a little add-on called marine traffic, in case you're interested. And keep this turn coming round. might wind up a little bit actually, because we're in danger of actually flying past it, which is what we don't want. All right, so about there will do. That will put us on a nice extended center line. There we are. So you can see we've taken a much tighter circuit than we did last time, and shortly we're about to intercept the localizer, so that's all good. Right, so we've been cleared for the approach, so let me press the land button. By the way, just the difference between the land button and the VL button. The VL button, if I unselect that and I select V, then all it will do is just give me the localizer. All right, so it won't descend us on the glide slope. It will track the inbound localizer down to the runway, but when we hit the glide slope, it won't do anything. So we've been cleared for the whole ILS, so I'm going to press the land button. If all we were cleared for was the localizer, then obviously you would use the VL, the VOR lock button, and you can also track a VOR with that as well. This is the only Airbus that will track a VOR. It's getting itself a little bit bent out of shape with the speed again. Bit of a classic A300 thing. Got to keep an eye on that, because you can see we're right on the top of the red bar there on the speed tape. So we want to try and stay out of that if we can. Right, there's 10 miles. So remember what we do. First stage of flap with the speed to match. All right, so we're going to get S speed at just a few knots above. And then the next thing, we'll keep an eye on the glide slope. As soon as it gets to the first dot, we will take the second stage of flaps and the gear. And I might do it a fraction earlier this time, because obviously at the last one we were stable by 500, but I want to be hand flying it before that. So I want to try and get it all fully stable so that I can take over manual control by about 1,000 feet. So just keeping an eye on the glide slope. There it is. So second stage of flaps, gear down, and bring the speed down to V approach, which is 143. Set the go-around altitude, 2,500 feet. Check that our heading is going the right way. And remember the flap speeds, all right? 205 knots for the third set of flaps. So we're good. We're at 190. And as soon as the speed tape gets to 175, which is there, we can go to the full selection of flap. So there's 180. Remember, don't do it yet. Don't do it yet. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Give it a few knots under, make till it gets to about 170. And there's 170, so now we go to the full selection of flap. You can see that, you know, any sooner than that, and we would have gotten over speed. So we've got VAP in, we've set the go-around altitude, heading is where we want it to be. We've got full flap. The speed brake is armed. I'm going to put it on medium because I'm a bit of a rotten hand flyer, as you well know. And here we go, we've got about 1,000 feet to run, so I'm going to take manual control. You lucky people. See, look, the airplane slowed itself down there a little bit. Let's give it a few more knots just so that it gets itself back where we want it to be. Now, taking manual control of the thrust, have a quick look at what the N1 is doing. The N1 is what, about 68, something like that, 67. So let me take out the auto thrust, and you see it says man thrust. I'm going to manually stick the thrust on about 68. There we are. Get the viewpoint where we want it to go. Bring out the auto pilot. We get that little balloon just like we did back in Dublin, but I'm ready for it now. And all we're going to do now is just keep the aeroplane coming down. So get it on the glide slope, get it on the localizer, get the speed nailed. We're a little bit fast, and again we're just dipping below the glide slope a little bit. But it's all right. The pappies are still 2 whites, 2 reds. Remember, of course, the pappies and the glide slope very often in the sim don't quite match up. All we're really doing now is we're just aiming for the touchdown markers, those 2 big white blocks. That's what we're aiming for. Don't worry too much about the glide slope and the localizer now. Really now it's just about looking outside. Quick check on the speed every now and again. That all looks pretty good. And just keep it coming down. Start the flare at about 40 feet. and then hold it off, hold it off, hold it off, hold it off, hold it off. There we go. All right. And then let's get some reverses in. It was acceptable. Still quite a firm touchdown, but again, we didn't break anything. So 80 knots, get the reverses out. And what we'll do is we'll just taxi off to the left here. High speed, really want to be under 60 knots, you know, don't want to go steaming around the corner here. So I'm just letting it decel. The auto brake is still in. And now I'll give it a little push, disconnect that. Apparently in the real A300 you needed a really hard push to get the auto brakes out. And Eric told me they didn't really like using it very much because what would happen is you get a nice smooth deceleration, and then the next thing that would happen is you get this huge big kind of kick from a heavy-footed pilot getting it out of auto brakes. Right, we are here. What I'm going to do is just stop on the taxiway quick. I'm not going to bother with the taxiing and all that stuff. And then we do our cleanup actions, flaps and slats and cleaning up and doing the lights and all that stuff. So there you are, guys. You got one of my acceptable landings. I am at best an acceptable hand flyer. That's as good as it gets with me. But you did see how the landing configuration works, when we should get the flaps down, when we should slow the aeroplane down, what you should be seeing in the FMA, and in terms of make sure the heading bug is lined up with where you want to go, make sure that you've got the go-around altitude in there. So that's pretty much it. We'll do some more videos. You've seen a go-around, you've seen 2 approaches and 1 landing. Again, I'm no ace of the base. I'm not perfect at any of this, but hopefully it's given you an idea on how the guys do this in the real aeroplane. I'm Ben from Airline2Sim. It's been great having you on my video today, and subscribe and stay tuned for more videos with the fantastic Airbus A300.